Hello, and welcome to the series where I show you what I'm doing to try and become a web developer. My name's Craig, and this is week 13. I am over the moon this week. I finally finished the JavaScript module on FreeCodeCamp, and I even started the next one on front-end frameworks. Let's dive in and see how much time I've spent this week on web development. Total time for web development this week is 20 hours and 5 minutes, and that's split up as 6 hours 45 for tutorials and 13 hours 20 minutes for projects. Again, not a huge deal of time, but I'm quite happy with it. The project's time's rather heavy because of finishing off FreeCodeCamp's JavaScript projects, and the tutorials are mainly to do with the FreeCodeCamp front-end framework section. Let's dive in to see what I've been learning this week. So, majority of my time this week has been with FreeCodeCamp. I do love this resource, so definitely go check it out. The projects took up a fair amount of time finishing off the JavaScript module, but I'm over the moon with them. The code could be a lot cleaner for the projects, but I wanted to break it down so I could kind of understand it step by step what I was doing. I might revisit them later on when I have a bit more experience to see if I can try and clean them up a little bit. After finishing the JavaScript module, I started the front-end framework on FreeCodeCamp, and I've already completed 2 parts of that. That is Bootstrap and jQuery. Both are relatively quick and easy, but they do only scratch the surface. I feel a little bit more comfortable with Bootstrap now. It only went over containers, rows, and columns. jQuery was really good. The only problem is it didn't go into that much detail in explaining how to get it into your own project. FreeCodeCamp has it in the background of it, so you don't really have to add the script. But I got everything working on my own computer as well, with some slight changes to, I think it was animate CSS properties. I'm really looking forward to finishing off the front-end frameworks. I think it's really exciting to get into that now. CSS battles took up a bit of time as well this week. The challenges were a lot harder. I don't know why, I just struggled, and I was using a lot more code. There was one challenge where I didn't get 100%, and I spent, I would say, a good 45 minutes just trying to make it 100%, and I'm like 1 or 2 pixels out, and it's really annoying me. So I put it down. I was like 99.9% is good enough. I also started working a little bit on backend. I started following a course on Skillshare. Unfortunately, the course says part 1 of 2, and there is no part 2 of that course on Skillshare. The whole course is available on Udemy, but I want to kind of exhaust the Skillshare resource as much as possible. But I'll link that down below. It was good introduction. I haven't quite finished it. I've got 1 or 2 lessons left. I do feel like backend kind of suits me a little bit more because I'm more analytical than creative. But since I've only scratched the surface, I think it's really hard to judge that right now. And the final thing I wanted to touch on was I found a new resource called the Odin Project. It's open source and free for anyone wanting to learn web development, and it looks really good. However, it's based on Linux or Mac OS, and I, for the life of me, struggled to get Linux working on either my desktop or my laptop. I tried a bootable USB drive on my laptop. It just wasn't working. I think I had to change something in the BIOS, and I didn't really want to do that. Similarly, I tried a virtual machine on my computer. I didn't want to dual boot Linux on my main desktop just in case something went horribly wrong. So yeah, unfortunately I haven't been able to make any progress with the Odin project, but if you are good at Linux or you have a Mac, I definitely suggest checking it out. It looks really good, and it has 2 kind of paths, a JavaScript full stack developer, and I think it's Ruby on Rails. Yeah, definitely check that one out. Let's see what I've been building this week on the computer. Not too much going on with the computer this week. I'll go through a drop-down menu that I created. Kind of wanted to do something like the mega menu from the Fiverr request that I had the previous week, but didn't get around to doing it. I thought do a drop down which is slightly similar but a little bit easier. I've also got my CSS battles, the results from my project for FreeCodeCamp, along with a few files from the front end section of FreeCodeCamp. Let's dive right in. So first up, I've got a few things on my week 13 navigation. I've got this nice kind of color changing complete on the JavaScript FreeCodeCamp section. Just wanted to celebrate that a little bit. I do need to update this slightly. The navbar link isn't working, but I have got it open in another tab. And I need to remove this front-end meta because I didn't actually do front-end meta this week. So first up, we have the drop-down nav. I've got it open in mobile. So we click the hamburger bar and there's a slight animation where the middle one slides out. And then on click, we can open or close these drop-downs. If we close the navigation and reopen it, everything's reset and closed. So that's quite nice. However, there's a bit of a styling problem on larger screens. So on hover, these now open rather than on click. And I kind of wanted these items to span the whole screen, but when I was doing that, drop down 3 was kind of off screen. You can tell here it's off screen a little bit. Some kind of issues going on there, but because the main feature was getting the drop down working, I wasn't too bothered about the styling. So we've got 2 CSS battles that I want to go over. First up, we've got this fidget spinner. I got a very high character count for this one. I believe this is an element, that's an element, that is a pseudo element, and these are elements, both with pseudo elements as well. And it just took me a long time to try and get it pixel perfect, I guess. I think there could have been a better way, but it looks decent. Next up, we've got this cube, and this is the one where I was working on it for about 45 minutes and I could not get 100%. I was pulling my hair out and it was really frustrating. I was like, 99% is enough. Let's just move on and forget it ever happened. Then we've got my FreeCodeCamp solutions. I don't know why I've got the palindrome and the Roman numerals in text format. The others I've written as a JavaScript file themselves. Before we dive right in, if you don't want to see the solutions, just kind of skip this bit. But we're only going to go through the telephone validator and the cash register. These ones, I know I could improve, but I wanted to break it down so I could understand it a little bit. First up, we've got the telephone validator. So to begin with, I kind of checked to see if there's any characters in the string. If there was characters, I would just return false because you can't have letters in there. But later on, I actually commented this code out because it's handled elsewhere. I believe it's either the digit checker or this one down here kind of handles it. But next up, I then broke it down. So if it didn't have any letters in it, see how many digits. So it should have 10 or 11 digits, depending if it uses, I believe it was a country code. So basically we're saying if it's less than 10 or if it's greater than 11, return false. And I was like, okay, so the digits are fine. If it is 11 characters, I want to check to see if the country code is 1. So again, we test if it's 11, and if it does not begin with 1, return false. Next up, we have the check for brackets. So we've got brackets could only contain 3 digits, and we've got a single bracket here as well. So we've got a or separator. So I tested to see if it's got a single bracket. So it's got at least 1 bracket. And I wanted to check to make sure that it had either less or more than 3 characters. So that got rid of, if we go down here, kind of this example, it would fail, and this one, I believe it would fail. Finally, I kind of created a final string, I guess. So I split it by space, dash, or bracket. I then joined it all together using a dash. So it was in the format of either like 333, 33 or 4. Or it could be 1 string of digits if it didn't have any spaces or dashes or brackets in. So for example, this 555 down the bottom, it would stay in that 1 string. Then it was just a simple check to make sure it followed the format of 3 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits, or 10 digits. And because the country code was either separated by a space or a bracket, it could kind of ignore that country code. So that was the telephone code. I've seen some solutions where people have done it in one line, and I think that's awesome that they can do that. I'm not at that level, and this makes a lot more sense to me, breaking it up and making sure things work. Next, we've got the cash register, and this one I know I could improve. I just couldn't get this kind of helper function working how I wanted it to. So I've just kind of listed these all out. These are all identical, these if statements. So to begin with, we calculate the change to 2 decimal places. I've set up this blank array, which I'll then put the amount of change in. And I've got the currency, which I create an object from the cash in draw array that's provided. So from the cash in draw, I check the total available currency. So I just do a reduce on the array to get a total amount. And we've got these first 2 checks. So if the available is less than the change needed, return the insufficient funds. If the available is exactly equal to the change, return that the till is closed and the amount of change is the cash in the draw. Next, we work out how much change we can give. So I've done this in a while loop. So while the change is greater than 0, I kind of loop through all these different if statements. So I'll just go through one if statement because they're all exactly the same. So we check to make sure the change is greater than the amount we are trying to return. So for example, we'll go through the 100. So if the change is greater than 100 and the amount of currency of $100 bills we have is greater than 0, we get the multiple. So how many times we have of the $100 can go into the change. I then check to make sure that we actually have that amount of $100 bills available. So we do a ternary operator. We times the multiple that we've just calculated by 100, check the currency and check that's greater than the currency. If it isn't, then we recalculate the multiple using the what's available currency, else return the multiple. I then recalculate the currency in the cash in draw by subtracting how much we've taken and push that to the blank array we created above and updated the change. So we do that for each loop, working downwards from 100, 20, 10. And I've got the incrementer for I there. So it's not an infinite loop. And I also check if I is greater than the length of the cash and draw array, I put the change to -1 and return insufficient funds. So basically that means we've gone through the entire cash and draw array and we haven't been able to get the amount of change required, the exact amount. So we return insufficient funds and the blank array. So what I really wanted to do with this was to put this in some kind of function where I could loop through it. The problem is I need to have this, the 100 or 20, some kind of character string. I need that and the value. I'll also need the change array, which we push into, and the currency object that I've created, and the change itself. So there's quite a lot to go into it, and I don't know if that was a bit too complex. And when I tried it, just something wasn't working quite right. So I would love to revisit this with a bit of a streamlined code. But we'll move on to the kind of 3 files that I created in the front end section on FreeCodeCamp. So the first 2 are from Bootstrap, and the second one is the jQuery file. So we've got this kind of cat photo app, which if you've gone through FreeCodeCamp before, it is created in the HTML section, but this is just kind of updated using Bootstrap. Yeah, it looks great on mobile, but on desktop, I'm not a big fan of it. This doesn't look great. That should be centered, and it looks really spread out on desktop. Next up, we create this jQuery playground, which is then used in the next part of the front-end framework section. And again, this is all using Bootstrap. I believe this is using a well, which is pretty cool. I never heard of that, and it kind of gives it a bit of depth. And then you've got default buttons along the top. And then finally, let me just refresh this because it's got animations. So this is actually slightly different to what is used in FreeCodeCamp, just because of how Animate CSS was working. I had to tweak it slightly to make it work on my own PC. But I'm quite happy with this. I then also tweaked it slightly to have the hinge on the body work through an on-click method. So if I click this, you've got that nice animation. And it was really fun doing kind of animations with jQuery. Very simple, quite easy to do. That is everything for week 13. Unfortunately, my uncle cancelled on me again. He's got a lot of work on, so he hasn't been able to prepare his files. I think we've tried to schedule it again, but I don't know if it will happen before the new year. Next week, unfortunately, it's going to be a really short week. I say unfortunately, it's nearly Christmas and I'm going down to London to see my sister, so I'm really excited and I'm fine with it being a short week. I will try to progress FreeCodeCamp's front-end frameworks and possibly look into backend. There's I think it's a 15-hour course on Skillshare I've had on my list for ages. It's a main course, so Mongo, Express, React, and Node. I think that would be really interesting. All the links will be down below, and I would greatly appreciate any feedback or thoughts you have on this video and my projects. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and hit subscribe if you'd like to see more. I will catch you all later.